Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything, I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on top of my mom's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars. One night I saw an intensely bright floating light over the treeline, probably about a half-mile away. I hollered, but nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange strobing flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 2, then 1, about 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights which were maybe 30 to 40 feet across each, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had. Then, it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. The craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight, waved my hand over it a couple times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent, for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner. It then changed light pattern and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, The fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I have seen that same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was night time and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to a Hoth fighter, forgive the Star Wars references, and as soon as I saw it, it took off to the right silently, extremely quick. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, move slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colors. One strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It was very strange to me, since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother and she had told me that she heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Englewood neighborhood. It was nighttime and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it and maybe about 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left, one at a time at a quick pace, leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've also had a bunch of experiences with orbs. Some solid lit that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to a great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large amount of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I have had so many experiences, and I have only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be that since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful but still don't know much about my experiences. If y'all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Okay, I guess I'll share my story. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I've tried telling this to several of my friends and once to my dad, but they always thought I was just joking around or something. I wish I was. It was 2009. I was 13. I was staying up late on the family computer on a Friday night, playing some flash game or something. I remember my mom had just gone to bed 10 minutes prior. I vividly remember typing in half the URL to addicting games when I heard it. This weird silence. It's hard to explain, but all sound disappeared except for the sounds of my fingers on the keys. No crickets outside, no wind, not even the sounds of my loud computer in the room. I stopped and sat there for a second wondering if there was something wrong with me. I remember worrying I was having a stroke or something. Then I was there. This huge space. Pitch black. I could barely make out the edges of the room, but it was vaguely metallic. It was freezing. It took me a couple minutes just laying there for it to sink in what was happening, but I was floating in this giant room staring up at where the ceiling should be. There were no lights anywhere, but somehow the small area I was hovering in was illuminated. I remember kind of looking around and taking it all in a sort of fugue state until sound came back, only now there was this strange hum that was sort of going up and down in pitch slowly, kind of like a motor but softer and more harmonic or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was like there were multiple layers stacked like a chord rising up and down in this weird dissonance that made me really uneasy. When I snapped out of it, I took this huge breath and my adrenaline kicked in. I tried moving, but I could only move my head. My clothes were still on, but I was just floating there, head whipping around trying to figure out what the F was going on. I was fully awake, possibly more awake than I've ever been since. I can't tell you how intense the fear was. Then this sound of breathing came from behind me, and what sounded like heavy, hard footsteps on a metal surface. Loud, deep exhales with almost this sort of vibration to them. I turned my head as best I could to try and see, but it was coming from beyond the light. My heart was beating so hard I thought I was going to die. I started to see a figure emerging, slowly at first. My brain was having trouble registering it. It wasn't human. It was big. As it approached the light, I started to make out the features. It was a horse. This damn brown horse with black hair slowly walked into the light and past me. I remember feeling the heat from its body as it did. It was so close. Then it went to what looked like a door at the edge of the room closest to my feet, just where the light was starting to fall off again. And it stood up. I heard a sort of zipper-like sound, and all of a sudden the horse collapses like skin to the ground, revealing a small humanoid figure. It turns around and looks at me with huge black eyes, then just walks out the door. Before I could process any of this, there was suddenly a presence beside me, and I turned my head just in time to see another humanoid thing putting this ball with lights on it over my face. Then I woke up, but I didn't wake up in my bed. I was outside my house, a couple kilometers away. My clothes were a little ripped and dirty, and I had this awful headache. I slowly got up and looked around. I was down this dirt road near my house. We lived in the countryside, and just outside the driveway of one of our neighbors. When I realized where I was, I just walked back to my house, took an Advil, and went to bed. At the time I just wanted the night to be over, and I had no idea what happened. But as time has gone on, I know for a fact that what I experienced was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't sleep paralysis or sleepwalking or that thing Mike Birbiglia has. It was so incredibly real. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Years. And anytime I see a horse on someone's farm or whatever, I think about that night. I think about telling them. But what would they say? First time I ever tried to write this down, first time telling anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. Summer before 8th grade, me and two of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighborhood and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that and as close if not closer. Completely silent and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across, no exaggeration, even though I was young. We stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black polished gunmetal, no lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft/ship/government experiment/whatever the hell it is has gone, and there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back, like F-150s or S-10s but nicer, came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25 miles per hour neighborhood. Then after that I remember walking home to one of my friend's houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it. Don't know how or why we did that. We all grew up and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, except in how we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scare me too, plus I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, no word spoken about it again ever by anyone. This is a true story. I'm a little older than the average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened. And there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. When I was young, the neighborhood kids used to play dark hide and seek or dark capture the flag, often pretty late at night. Our parents were okay with it as long as we didn't leave the neighborhood. It was the early 90s. We were basically thrown out of the house on the weekends. Anyway, one night after the game was over and everyone had gone home, my stepsister and I were hanging out in our front yard, just sitting on one of those green cable boxes talking. At one point she stops talking and points into the sky and asks about a light in the sky. I turn and look and see it myself. The light was faint blue, and was brighter and bigger than the stairs around it. It was moving in ways that seemed impossible and it became aware we were looking at it as soon as I locked eyes on it. I don't know how to describe that. I know that. It was just this immediate feeling that it was looking right back at us. Suddenly, the light moved towards us almost in the blink of an eye. It went from being roughly double the size of a star in the sky to as bright as an airplane or helicopter searchlight instantly. There was no sound and the light didn't illuminate the surrounding area, which gave it a weird feeling. I tried to say something to my sister, but I found myself unable to speak and I could suddenly barely move. I just turned my head to see my sister looking very scared, also unable to speak or move. I thought I heard a noise and the light started shining on me, which made me turn my head back towards the object, and then I felt a piercing light basically blind me. I was like bathed in the blue light. After this, things get a bit hazy, like I was meant to not remember it, even though certain moments are as plain as any memory from that time. I was in a place that was mostly dark, but there were lights that seemed to hover by themselves, with no visible technology, pole etc. holding them up. I don't know if I was laying down or standing up because there was a feeling of no gravity or downward force in any direction. I remember interacting with an entity that was human-esque but seemed to be different. Like a beautiful person, but they had no male or female characteristics, completely androgynous but with very symmetrical and smooth appearance to the face and body. Otherwise, very human-looking. They talked to me, but I was acutely aware that it was in my head and not out loud. It was like moments of being conscious with moments of haziness in between. I don't know how to describe it. I was aware that they were doing things to me, but I don't remember what. I do distinctly remember a piercing device they inserted just behind my ear on my right side. It went pretty deep, but it didn't hurt. It just felt almost itchy for a second, and they told me they were taking a sample and depositing something that would allow them to remotely monitor me for some time. They explained that this was not the first time they had done this to me specifically, and that they would continue to do so throughout my life. And that there were literally thousands of people they were doing this to. It was a scientific study of some kind that they tried to explain to me, but I honestly don't remember the purpose. I was able to ask them a few other things in the moments of being conscious, like where my sister was. They explained she was having the same thing done to her. I asked them point blank if they were aliens, and they found it humorous and told me they were humans from the future. But I got the distinct feeling that this wasn't the truth. Again, I don't know how to describe why I thought this. It was just a different feeling when they told me this versus the other things they were saying. It felt like a lie or simplification of some kind. After some time of being out of it again, I became aware that my body was bathed in blue light again, and the darkness started to recede. I was able to see the stars and the sky again. I don't know how long it was before I really understood where I was, but at some point I sorta came to and realized I was sitting on the grass, next to my sister, in the neighbor's yard about 50 to 60 feet from the original spot. My sister came to almost at the same time. We both immediately looked at each other and then to the sky. The light was gone, but the sun was coming up. It was then we realized it had been hours. We didn't really talk about what happened. We just felt the need to go inside and go to bed before we got in trouble. It was years later before I ever spoke to my sister about that night, and she remembers much less than I do. She remembers seeing the light, being blinded by it, and then feeling weird, and then waking up beside me. To this day she has explained it away by us seeing a helicopter in the sky and just falling asleep because we were tired. She won't discuss it beyond that. I honestly had forgotten about this event until 2 years ago, when my wife mentioned that I had a spot behind my right ear that kinda looked like a burn mark or a scar, but also like a pimple/mole. She likes to pop things and was dying to let her try to pop it. When she reminded me of it, the memories of the event flooded back into my head, and I was a bit emotional but agreed to let her mess with it. She tried to pop it but said nothing came out. It's still there, and looks exactly as she describes it, kinda like a mole but also kinda like a scar. I've had MRIs and other scans throughout the years, but nothing has ever shown up, so I have no idea what it is or if anything is inside there. I try to not think of it now because although I wasn't scared at the time, it is unnerving to think about now. That's my story as honestly as I remember it. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago, when my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird stuff would happen to my dad. Some of it is pretty similar to the stuff described in this thread, actually, isolated earthquakes, in Illinois, that nobody else felt, bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. For your info, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just effing with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have good reasons to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make stuff up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making this up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO stuff has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home, they're out shopping / at work / whatever. Suddenly, this big, black car pulls into his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here, not only is this a rural area, but it's approximately 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens and out steps a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white man asks my dad if he lives here. My dad says yes, and asks why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone, and seems almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes, and again asked why he wanted to know. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty comfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent, his behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his car door, gets inside and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mom saw the same guy. 30 fucking years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something, to know the details really, when she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at table in the cafe, 30 feet or so from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude, dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mom had heard this story from my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of this man. He definitely stood out. So she's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the heck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the MIB sent their most inept agent to follow around my dad. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family and our natural habitat. I don't know. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Hope to see you soon for more scary stories on Peaks from Dark.